That could be a sheet of notebook paper.
My nickname in Africa was So White.
So white.
So White.
Nice.
You're bringing up so many memories, and it's dark.
Yeah.
It's dark memories. And as you're talking, and I know what's coming next, I have this weird thing going on in my head. I'm thinking of Frodo and Sam.
Yeah.
You know, like at
I love Lord of the
Mount
Rings.
Doom.
Yes.
It's recording now.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Dr. Stevens. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Sweet. So you're looking nice, summertime.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting the legs out, and doing my best to tan, which I don't, but,
Yeah. You won't have much luck the next week. It's going to be cloudy.
I know, but, never hurts to try. So
How was your drive from Bell?
Not too bad. Not too bad. The drive is pretty nice. Like, now that it's not, now that we're into the summer, and, well, technically, I guess we're still in spring, but, now that trees and, flowers and bushes have foliage and stuff, which I never imagined myself using that word, but now that it has all that stuff, it's nice to look at and see, and it's kind of hilly, and so as you go up and down, you kind of see all the different trees.
Sure.
And
Yeah. I kind of missed that drive. Becky and I went down to Gasconade Camp one time, and we just miss this landscape because you get up here and it's flat and the wind blows, you feel it all the time. And I ministered for a long time, just 15 miles from where you are.
Right, because you were in Lynn, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we missed that area. Plus, I did that interim ministry. Sorry.
Right.
At your church for about a year. Mm-hmm. So it's good to see you. Probably been at least a month.
Yeah.
Since I've seen you, because you like to make regular treks here to
I
study.
do. Yeah, and I was I was telling Jonathan earlier. I was like, because he was like, well, when, how long ago have you seen Dr. Stevens? And I was like, I see most of the professors 2 to 3 times probably a semester. Because, right now I'm working on my Master of Divinity. And so I have papers, I have assignments that have to get done. And so up to Central I come, grab some resources, run to the library, grab something from the bookstore, and just kind of peruse and try to figure out what I'm going to do, and I try to do it on time. So
yeah, good job. Let's go back in time.
Okay.
So I've been here teaching for 20 years, and a few years ago you showed up.
I did.
So talk about where you came from, and you can do that both physically and spiritually.
Okay.
And how you got here.
Yeah. So my journey is really my journey to Central is kind of a nice little reflecting back and seeing how God worked sort of story. Mm-hmm. I never wanted to be in ministry. So admittedly, ministry was not what I wanted to do.
I can feel that.
Yeah. And so a lot of people who are in ministry, they feel that way at times. And I had an uncle I have an uncle who's involved in ministry. And so, I knew about ministry. I knew the toll that it could take on families. I knew the hardship that can go into having ministry. I knew the amount of work that could go into it. And if I'm just being honest, I had seen firsthand sort of economic instability, and at certain points throughout ministry. Some people are very blessed. I mean, it's like with any other job, some people are very blessed with the various ministries that they find themselves in, and they're able to make ends meet, and they never worry about finances at all. And then as I'm sure there are some ministers who, they're preaching, they're working at a church, they're picking up, whatever side job they can, whether it's, working as a barista at a coffee shop, or, doing whatever else, to kind of help make ends meet. And the more time that you're involved with side jobs is less time that you're involved with your family. And so it can be very stressful.
Yeah.
And because I had kind of seen some of that stuff firsthand, I was like, that's not me. Like, I'm not going to do ministry. So I found myself sort of Jonah-esque, kind of running away from it. I started thinking about jobs that were going to give me plenty of money. I was never going to worry about my finances. That was never going to be an issue. I was going to be a chemical engineer. I didn't know what a chemical engineer really did. I was taking chemistry, and I was like, chemistry's cool, so let me be a chemical engineer because it has the word chemistry in it, sort of. And so that's what I was kind of looking to do. And it wasn't really until the summer after my junior year of high school. I went to CIY.
Okay.
And
where'd you go?
Longview, Texas.
Okay.
They still had their sessions going on at Longview. I know they did it for a while. I'm not sure if they still meet there at
I went to
Longview.
Tahlequah, Oklahoma.
Tahlequah. Okay. I don't know where that's at.
That's Northeast Oklahoma State University. Dennis Rodman is
there you go.
Went to school there.
That's
where his career started.
I forget the name of the school that they did it at. I actually looked at going to that school, so it's funny that I don't remember it. But it's a school in Longview,
Yeah. So you're at CIY.
I was at CIY, and I'd been to CIY. I mean, this was the summer after my junior year, so I'd already been to probably 3 or 4 CIYs.
Okay.
I knew the drill. I know how things go. And so, I knew that at some point they're going to do this presentation of
absolutely
who is going to go into full-time ministry. Yeah. They do that towards the end of the week, for the most part, of all the various decisions that have been made. So people who gave their life to Christ for the first time, people who have rededicated their lives. Mm-hmm. And then finally, at least at my part, they started adding in the kingdom worker who wants to be a kingdom worker. But before that, they did who feels called into full-time ministry. Prior to them asking that, I did not feel called into full-time ministry. And I found myself standing. So
this is like the third or fourth time you've been there.
Yes.
You've heard this over and over again.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like me, on Sunday morning when the preacher offers the invitation, I know I'm supposed to respond, but I just don't.
Right.
Till that one time.
Yeah.
It's time.
Then you stand and you walk forward. It's a lot like church invitations. And I remember thinking, there's no going back now, right? Like, I'm not at CIY by myself.
Yeah.
I am there with my youth pastor, and her husband is there,
mm-hmm.
and all my friends. I have cousins that were here, and they're all like looking at me, while I'm standing, and I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I standing? Yeah. And they're all like clapping, because everybody's clapping. I mean, these are all people who have made huge lifelong decisions. Yeah. And so I'm like, I'm stuck now. Like there's no going back.
It wasn't like, hallelujah, Jesus, here I am.
there was some of that, but, for the most part, it was very much so like, because this was something that I had never really wanted to do.
Yeah. So give a shout out to your home church. Who'd you...
Crossbridge Christian Church, Houston, Texas.
Houston, Texas. I was Houston.
Cypress, Texas, technically.
Yeah, okay.
But, sorry, I blanked. Yeah. If my pastor sees this, he's going to be like, oh my gosh. But I even did my internship there when I was a student at Central. Okay. But Crossbridge Christian Church is where I pretty much grew up. And it's down in Cypress, Texas. So that started my journey into ministry. At the time...
You still have the same minister?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
He started there 2008, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
All right.
He's a St. Louis Christian alum, actually.
Okay, good.
And so now that pretty much pulls him into Central's alumni.
Sweet.
But that leads to that's a good segue and a good transition into how I got to Central.
All right.
I felt called into ministry. I knew very little about college. I didn't know much about the experience. I didn't know really how to research college. And for the most part, high school counselors were only relatively helpful. They don't specialize in Christian colleges and Bible colleges, right? So in my head, the only college that I knew...
Did you go to a Christian school?
No, I went to a public school.
Yeah, my high school counselor was really, her worldview did not include Christian schools.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was blessed to go to a public school that was a little bit more accepting and understanding of, you know, Christian values. I mean, that's part of just growing up in the deep South. But for the most part, the only school I really knew was like Texas Christian University.
Okay.
So in my head, I was like, I'm going to be a youth pastor. I'm going to go to Texas Christian University. I looked at how much Texas Christian University costs, and I said, I'm not going to Texas Christian University. And so I was really trying to figure this out. I had my youth pastor. She had gone to Ozark Christian.
Okay.
So at the time, you know, this is 2014 that I'm really looking, 2015. I was looking and I was like, I just don't know. Like, all of the numbers look really big when you're looking at how much it's going to cost, you know, cost of attendance, they look huge. And so for the most part, you're looking for which number looks the smallest. My senior pastor, he was a St. Louis alum. And so I was looking towards them. You know,
Makes sense.
I knew about the school. My pastor was very fond of the school, loved his time there, you know, loved his professors that had been there, and knew that they trained well. And so, you know, I was looking at that school, and I went to visit, and I just wasn't... I didn't connect there very well.
Okay.
It just didn't really feel like the place for me. I went on a visit, and I went with my mom and my dad, and we all went to visit. And even my mom was like, you know, I don't know if this is really where God wants you. But I didn't know where God wanted me, and I didn't know anywhere else that God could send me. Yeah. And so, funny enough, I was committed. I was like, I'm going. That's where I'm going to do my studies.
Is time running out at this point?
Yes. So...
Okay.
You might know this from me as a student. I'm a big time procrastinator. Okay. I like to write papers the night before they're due. Nothing gets me moving like running out of time.
Like deadlines.
Yes, like deadlines and, you know, running out of time for them. And so this was my last semester of my senior year that I was really looking into colleges and trying to figure out where I'm going. Around this time, my dad had lost his job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so finances were very tight and became, maybe this shouldn't have been the case, you know, the whole trusting God kind of thing.
Yeah.
But finances and affordability became the number one. Yeah. So during that time, I was still trusting God, you know, still going to do this whole St. Louis Christian thing. And I got a phone call from Michael Buttram.
Really?
Yes. With Central, but I didn't know he was from Central. I'd never heard of Central at this point.
Yeah.
I got a phone call, and of course, you know, St. Louis Christian was from Florissant, you know, Missouri, and so their calls never registered on my phone as like St. Louis. So it was always, you know, the suburb, you know, Florissant.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know that. I didn't know the towns. I wasn't familiar. I'm from Texas. I don't know anything about Missouri and, you know, the towns. So I get a call from Moberly, Missouri, and I answer it because I just assume it's St. Louis, you know, something about the admission process of me getting stuff in. And Michael Buttram, he answers, and he's like, hey, is this Richard? And I was like, yes, it is, you know. And he's like, hi, I'm Michael. I'm from Central Christian College of the Bible. And we got your information from the Next Gen Preacher Search, as well as CIY. So, you know, for those who don't know, you know, CIY, they like to take information from the people who want to go into ministry, and they distribute it to different Bible colleges for training. And so he had gotten my name from there. And he was like, you know, I don't know if you know much about our school. I didn't, never heard of it. And he was like, this was at the time, they were still doing a full tuition scholarship.
Right.
And so he told me, he was like, we want to offer you a full tuition scholarship. We offer it to the first 100 applicants who are accepted. We'd like you to apply. We'd like you to consider. And to me, that was God's answer.
Yeah.
Finances,
very cool.
For better or worse, with my dad losing his job, finances became my priority when it came to finding a school to go to.
Yeah. Circumstances can play a big role. My youth minister always encouraged me to go to Bible college for a year, and And so I wanted to do that. I didn't want to be a minister, but my dad had a work situation in which he was going to be out of town for a year. And so he asked me to put off going to Central and to go to Mizzou, which is what I was intending to do. And so I went that first year. I went to Mizzou, and then when he got back home from his work duty, then I came to Central the second year.
Okay.
Yeah, and that 1 year at Mizzou made me realize I really need something stronger to help me out.
And going back to that of circumstances playing big roles is further in my life. Now that I'm at the point that I'm at now, when I reflect on circumstances, when I reflect on time and things that I've gone through in my past, which we'll probably end up getting into at some point, I look at life as this giant puzzle, and each day, each day is one puzzle piece that you don't know how it fits into the overarching puzzle. And so when I look back on this stuff and I see how the puzzle pieces fit, it makes sense. Yeah, but it didn't make sense at the time.
Yeah, that's most people's story.
Right. And so, and I think that's just life as a whole, because we can't see the future. God can see the future. He knows how things are going to end up. And so ultimately it's almost like when he crafts us and knits us, as the Bible says, in our mother's womb, he knew us before we were ever born, and he knows how things end for us. So it's almost like he's the company, which I know this is like a really big stretch, but God is like the company that packages this puzzle.
Okay.
And so when you buy a puzzle, you see the picture, you see how it all, plays out, you see how it's supposed to look. Unfortunately, we don't actually see that.
Right.
God sees that. And so he knows how the pieces fit together, but you don't know as you're going through it. As you're building the puzzle, it's kind of like, to us, it's almost as if you were handed like a puzzle where it's all just one color. Like it's like this impossible puzzle where you're just trying to see how the pieces fit together, and you don't know what the picture actually looks like.
Yeah. So when I was ministering there close to where you are now, there was a 75-year-old guy who became a Christian, which is really unusual.
Right.
And he was a wealthy man, had his own business, and had retired from St. Louis out to that area. And he heard a preacher on the radio, and that got him moving toward God. And he ended up, at the church where I served, and that's his testimony would be, now that God is in my life, I can look back over the last 75 years and see where God was moving me all along the path. And he said, I just wish I would have recognized it sooner and gotten on board with God, when he was calling me then. He said, I'm really glad I answered now, but he said, I can look back in my life and see God at work all along the way.
Absolutely.
And I loved what you said about how you look at life, because one of the things that I think of when I think about you is I think about your curiosity. And I think about you always, your mind looks ahead and you ask questions. And so when you're in class, you're always asking questions and you're thinking ahead of where we are in class and where we're going. And
right.
And so that makes sense the way you're describing how you look at things.
Yeah. And, for the most part, I've always been a very curious person. And I like to learn things that that nobody cares about. I'll just be honest. Like, I pick up books that I'm like, wow, this book is so interesting. It's so exciting. And people are like, what are you reading on? And I'm like, economics. And they're like, why? And I'm like, I just find it fascinating, you know? Like, I love learning. I'm a big history person. I love to learn history. And I think that's also partially where sort of that piecing of the puzzle pieces comes together, is my obsession with history and looking back at, here's how people made these mistakes, and these mistakes got them to where they're at now. And that's when you get into Christianity and when you get into faith and God, we just call it a testimony, right? Like that's the language of the church is it's a testimony. And so there's all of these people who have very broken pasts. In my community, there's a lot of people that I work with at my church currently, who come from a past of substance abuse and, all kinds of issues that they face throughout their life. And much like the man that you mentioned, they wish, and I don't know if they wish, but they can't help but reflect, now that they are in the faith, they can't help but reflect and say, I wish that this had come sooner.
Right. Yeah.
But if it had, their stories wouldn't be the same that it is now. Mm-hmm. And the way that they tell their stories to other people would not be the same way that it is now. Mm. And so all of the people who have been touched by their stories, there's no way of telling whether or not that story would have had the same impact had one certain event not happened at the time that it did.
Yeah. So you were telling the story. I kind of interrupted it.
No, you're fine.
Did you come to Central for a visit after you got that phone call?
Nope.
No?
My first time on campus was when I showed up to be a student.
Was move-in day?
Yes. Freshman orientation was the very first day that I ever came to Central. Okay. I showed up, and I'm in Magic City, Moberly, Missouri, and the most I had seen were Google pictures. Like that was all I knew about the school. That's all I knew about Moberly. Yeah. And so I had seen snow, which I grew up in Houston. So, we had to buy snow.
Another adventure.
Yeah, we had to buy snow. Like we would have snow days when I was a kid in school where they would basically like buy a bunch of shaved ice. And so it wasn't real snow. It was like they'd come and import all of this this like shaved ice.
I thought you were going to say like spray snow that they like spray on the windows and stuff.
No, it's even worse because as a kid, like all I knew about snow was what I saw in like the Peanuts movies and like the shows and stuff. So like if it snows, you have a snowball fight. And so, and every time I experienced snow up to that point, we had a snowball fight. So it's like chucking like snow cones at each other, and it not as pleasant as an actual snowball fight.
Okay.
I was actually really bummed my freshman year when we got our first snow, because in my head, I still have like a movie and TV depiction of what snow looks like.
All right.
And so I had to go to class. That didn't happen in the movies,
Okay.
Like school gets canceled right away.
But I'm sure while you were here, we had a monster snow.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Two.
Oh, yeah, we did for sure. So there were a couple of times that there was school got canceled, didn't come to class, because blizzards or whatever.
Yeah.
But like early November, mid-November, when you get that first snow and it's just kind of like a nice little frosting on the ground. Mm-hmm. I was like, school's going to get canceled. I'm going to build a snowman. I was a grown-up at this point. I was 18 years old. I'm an adult. Like I could vote. Like, that's a scary thing. And so I was like really bummed about that. But other than that, I enjoyed freshman year. I enjoyed my time at Central. And
were you a preaching major at that point?
No. Fun fact, I actually never finished Central as a preaching major.
Okay. Because you mentioned youth ministry was an aspiration earlier.
Yes. That was the early on aspiration, was to go into youth ministry.
Okay. And
so I came here and I was a youth and family ministry major. So Walt Harper was my advisor. And so I took classes with him, and I loved those classes. I loved what I was learning as I was learning about, student development and human growth and development. I had to take that class. I took it with Ann Manier. And so I learned about, different approaches to teaching and how to, convey things to children as they develop. So as they grow older, what are some developmental things happening in their brains where you can use that to help teach the truth of the gospel. Yeah. So, my freshman year, I loved it. My sophomore year, I loved it. I made a ton of friends that are lifelong friends. My roommate was Kyle Ball. Mm-hmm. And so, me and him, we got up to all kinds of shenanigans, legal shenanigans.
Okay.
Just to preface that, But we did, I mean, we had a great time. I met all kinds of other people, and we just made all kinds of friends. Christian Collins, we became friends, and just a bunch of others.
So when you were a student here, I was dean. I was the academic dean.
Yes.
So what did you think of me as academic dean?
Everything was scary.
Was it?
Yes, everything was scary to me. I actually remember one of our first interactions. I was very bummed because I was looking at what I had to do. Maybe not one of our first interactions, but an interaction that we had where I was bummed. And I'll still die on this hill today, but you'll probably tell me why I'm wrong. But I was a Bachelor of Arts student.
Yeah.
So what's required of a Bachelor of Arts student? You have to take
Greek, Hebrew.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to have, was it four or 5 semesters of biblical language?
Probably 5.
And that's what it is. So biblical language. And I remember, I think it was like maybe my sophomore year. I didn't take Acts with you my freshman year. I did do it later. And so we didn't really interact a whole lot my freshman year. I don't think I remember having any classes with you, actually.
Who'd you have for Lock 1? Did you have Harper?
I did. I had Walt Harper was my borderline, like my only professor. I think I had him. I had him for like 3 or 4 classes that year. And then like I had Summa for, Old Testament classes.
Yeah.
But like discovering the Bible, I think I might have taken discovering the Bible with you.
Okay.
But I'm still relatively new to the school. I don't know a whole lot. And, sophomore year, I start looking at having to take a biblical language, right? Like I took, Greek 1.
Okay.
And you were the academic dean, and I was like, Dr. Stevens, I have to take 5 semesters of biblical languages. When I was in high school, I took Latin. And I was like, I passed the AP exam. Like I did Latin AP. I passed the exam, and I was like, that's a biblical language. And you were like, and now you know where this hill is. And you were like, that is not a biblical language. We cannot take that. And I was like, Dr. Stevens, I was like, the Latin Vulgate translation of the Bible.
That's the Bible. There's the Bible right there.
That's the Bible.
It's the official
yes.
language
and I was
of
like,
the Bible.
Exactly. That's the official language of like the entire Catholic Bible. Like, I've been to one Catholic service in my life. I think I know more about this whole ministry thing than you do with your doctorate degree. They talked in Latin at some point, and my mom like nudged me during that conversation, and she was like, "What are they saying?" And I was like, "I don't know, Mom. Like they're speaking the language. I'm lucky if I can know what's going on paper when I can read the words." But that was a hill that I was willing to die on. I'd still die on that hill.
Yeah.
If at the PhD level you have to study German and stuff, Latin should count. But that's just me. But yeah. And so, I was like, I really enjoyed my time, right? And so freshman and sophomore year was a really great time. Junior year was also a really good time. But I started to experience a lot of stuff while I was at Central. So the spring semester of my sophomore year, my grandmother passed away. So she had passed away, I want to say that was 2017, if I'm doing my math correct. Mm-hmm. So she passed away in January of 2017. I was actually late getting back to Central. Kyle became my RA, so I mean that's always a fun dynamic when you're when like your best friend and prior roommate goes to being your RA. But I had to be like, hey man, not gonna make it. Like please, make sure nobody steals my stuff because I had left it, and all that fun stuff. And so my grandma passed away that semester, and I moved into my junior year. After that semester ended, I went into my junior year, and I started dating somebody. There was somebody who came to the school.
That's where life gets complicated.
Yeah. Especially for me. I started dating a girl named Pate, and we had a we had a good relationship. We got to go through life together, start looking at what it looks like to plan life together. We were very serious. We very much so loved each other. And we started looking at what does ministry look like. And at this point, I was still very adamant on being in ministry and being a youth pastor. That was still the goal. I mean, that was still my degree. I had started kind of working a little bit with preaching. I had taken a preaching class. My junior year was my first year taking a preaching class. I started to develop a passion for preaching because of my internship at Crossbridge. Okay. My preacher let me preach a sermon one time, and I loved it. I loved looking at the Bible and crafting a sermon and being able to start putting in practice the things that I was learning at Bible college, right? Like I took interpreting biblical literature here, and we looked at grasping God's word, I believe was the textbook. Right. And so you have this river, that's how the book depicts it. You have this river, and then you have on one side of the river is the land of the Bible. So it's the historical context, it's the grammatical context, it's all of that stuff. Yeah. The river is crossing culture. So how do you take what was written to people thousands of years ago and get people today to understand what the point of the passage is? Right. And so I started to develop a huge passion for preaching, and I loved forming that bridge of how to cross that river. And I was more geared towards youth. I was still learning how to work with teenagers, and
so when you were in college, you're at school. Did you have opportunities to do youth ministry? Was there like churches like that you were involved with that you were doing some application of what you were learning?
I was doing a little bit, yes. Okay. For the most part, I wasn't a full-fledged youth minister. And so for the most part, when you're a youth and family ministry major, a lot of times you get plugged into youth groups as like youth sponsors, which is a nice little window in. You get to see a little bit of the behind-the-scenes stuff of youth ministry, but it's very difficult as just a sponsor, it's very difficult to grasp what it looks like to be a youth pastor, of having to do the programming. For the most part, as a sponsor, you implement the program that the youth pastor has kind of put together.
As a college student majoring in that, you should only be in that spot, a semester or a year. Right. And then you should, maybe get more involved with the planning or... Right.
And so I'll be honest, I was kind of bouncing from place to place as a youth sponsor. I started out up in Macon at Crossroads. And so I started there, and, I got pretty plugged in. Me and Justin, I don't know if Justin's still the youth pastor there. I don't think he is. I think he stepped into a different role. He was the youth pastor at the time, but I started working with him. And I got to, kind of peek in and see what youth ministry is like. Then I wanted to really branch out and see what else there was, and so I also wanted to not be at a church where so many of our students were at, because I was like, we don't need 40 Central students all helping with the same, youth ministry when there are other churches that don't have the same kind of help. Yeah. And so me and Kyle and Tyler Wright and Jake Striefler and Jason Merriman, we all went to Forum Christian Church down in Columbia. And so we started getting plugged in there, helping out there, and doing our youth sponsor thing there. But my junior year, I start looking into actual youth ministry. I started looking into being a youth pastor and, starting to try to find some kind of part-time job, and an opportunity came up for me to start doing that in Mexico, Missouri. And so I got plugged in at that church, and plugged in is not the right word. I got hired. I got hired.
Which church was that?
Southside Christian Church. Yeah. And so I got hired there and started doing youth ministry. This was leaving my, what was it? I was leaving my junior year. I was finishing up. Me and Pate, we were still going strong, still dating, and kind of looking towards some of those next steps. I got hired on as a youth pastor, and I couldn't quite commit to the summer. I was trying to do my best. I was on camp teams, so I was working camp teams.
Yeah.
While I was working camp teams, I bought an engagement ring. Got one of those big old paychecks that you get, when you're a part-time college student, and blew it all on an engagement ring, and was really looking forward to that next step in life. Being a youth pastor, looking at getting married, and I stepped into the youth ministry part-time. I was down there every single weekend.
Yeah.
When I started my senior year of college.
And Chris Harley was the minister there?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I started there, and I was kind of doing my thing there, trying to figure out how to do youth ministry. And really what I started to finally realize, I should have known, I paid attention in class enough to pick up on what the answers were to the tests. I didn't pay attention enough to know that, what I was doing. Right? So in my head, I'm like, be a youth pastor. It's super cool. Talk to people about Jesus, eat a bunch of pizza. Okay. In my head, that's youth ministry.
All right.
I get in there, and I quickly realize that programming youth ministry is a very different beast from being a sponsor. Mm-hmm. And so it was tough. It was a very rough adjustment curve.
Yeah.
So I have to backtrack quite a little bit. So as I had mentioned earlier, my dad lost his job my senior year of high school.
Right.
Finances was a really big deal. Didn't know what I was going to do. Tried to figure it out. Went to Central. Right before I left for the first semester here at Central, my dad developed a heart problem. He had a heart attack that shut down a quadrant of his heart. And so that was really tough. He went from not having a job to not being able to find a job because he was on disability.
Yeah, not being able to work.
Right. Yeah. And so the money issue was still kind of a thing, but I stopped thinking about that. My big thing became my big thing became the inevitable passing of my dad. They told him pretty much straight up, if you don't get a heart transplant, this medication's only going to help you for so long.
Wow.
And so that always lingered. And my senior year, my first semester of senior year of college, I was a youth pastor. I was doing this whole part-time youth ministry. I was engaged. I had a lot to balance. I was a student. I was a full-time Bible college student. And I remember I was in that room right down there, Reese's old room, and I was taking Old Testament prophets with Suma. And I got a phone call from my mom, which was not uncommon. Moms called kids who are at college.
Yeah.
I ignored the call.
She probably
admittedly.
She probably knows you're in class,
right,
during the day.
Right, and so for the most part, sometimes she doesn't know my full schedule, and so I ignored it. I silenced my phone, kept it from vibrating and all that fun stuff, and she called again. And for the most part, my mom is pretty good at, if I don't answer the phone, she knows that I'm probably busy, and so she'll just leave a voicemail. She called me again right away, and that's when I kind of knew something happened. And so I step out and I take the phone call, and I was sitting along this wall here, not this wall, but outside of this office, and my mom told me that my dad had suffered a heart attack and had died.
Oh wow!
So that was tough. That was the end of November. It was 1 week, pretty much to the day, I think, after Thanksgiving. And that was tough. Getting that call, realizing what's going on. knowing that I'm going to have to figure out how to get home for my dad's stuff and figure out funeral, figure out he ended up, we had a memorial for him, but figure that out, figure out how to finish my semester here at school, figure out.
If I remember right, you had a pretty big role, then in your family's life.
Yes.
You had responsibility, you don't expect to have at that age.
Yes. I did at that point for sure. Because, I became man of the house,
right?
It was on me to kind of come down and help sort things, help put things in order, help keep my mom sane, help with all of these things that got placed on me. And so now I'm going and I'm dealing with my dad's death, dealing with all of the burdens that come with somebody passing in your family. I'm stepping away from what's left of my semester, which I had been like suffering through Hebrew. Like my Hebrew grade was not very good. The language Hebrew, not Hebrew's class.
Right.
I had Old Testament prophets. Like this is my senior year, so I'm taking some of the harder, more challenging classes. I had to step away from that and figure out how I'm going to write research papers that I have coming up for classes while I'm 900 miles away in Texas.
I mean, it's the end of the semester.
Yes.
You got finals.
I've got finals coming up.
Papers.
Right. I have to figure out what that's going to look like for me. Luckily, one of the things that's very beneficial about Bible college is you end up with, overwhelmingly, for the most part, you end up with gracious and understanding professors who understand that life happens. And so Suma was my predominant teacher that semester. He was teaching Old Testament prophets and Hebrew. And so he really helped me a lot through that time and was able to, work with me, as were all my professors. They were able to work with me. They understood. It was no problem for me to take pictures of my finals, download them from online or whatever. They would email them to me if they had to. I would download them, work them out.
Yeah.
I'm
you're bringing up so many memories and it's dark.
Yeah.
It's dark memories. And as you're talking, and I know what's coming next, I have this weird thing going on in my head. I'm thinking of Frodo and Sam. Like at Mount Doom. Yes. And they think the world's ending.
Yes.
And this is it. This is the end.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the part I'm thinking about, the ring's already in the mountain and it's starting to fall apart and
yes.
And they're just having these kind of like this reminiscent conversation about we did the best we could.
Right.
Kind of thing. And it's all coming to this really unpleasant end.
Yes.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
But I'm experiencing those feelings because I know this story. The story's going to get darker.
Yeah.
And I want it to get to the lighter part.
Yeah. Because there is a light part to it.
Yeah.
And again, it's part of looking at the puzzle pieces. Now that I've progressed in the puzzle to the point that I'm at now, I can see how the pieces fit together. But that happened. My dad passed away November 28th, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And so that happened November 28th, and I finished my semester. I had to step away from my youth group.
That's wise.
They gave me some time. They understood what was going on. I took a month away from that.
Yeah. And
I was behind the eight ball for the most part, going into the youth ministry. I was having to figure out how to plan NYR, how to program this youth ministry. And now I'm gone. And I'm gone for like a month and a half. And I didn't come back until like New Year's Day. On January 1st is when I came back to Missouri from my family. Stepped back in, started my semester, got back right into the youth ministry stuff. I was doing that. And then January 21st, there was a lot that had gone on, and so Pate, at that semester, she had stepped away from Central. She no longer was a student. She started thinking about cosmetology. And so we were kind of looking at what that would look like. And, there was a school in Columbia. And I was like, why don't you live in Mexico, Missouri? Why don't you just live there? We'll continue to do this youth ministry thing. And, we'll continue to do this together. I was engaged at this point.
Yeah.
We got engaged in October, the month before my dad passed. And, so she moves there. She gets sort of an apartment, a place to live there. And at the time, she was working at the Walgreens here in Moberly. We had just had a giant snowstorm blow through. I was at the church for my weekend, and I had a meeting to go to on Monday. So January 21st that year was a Monday, and I had been at a meeting. Was doing some youth ministry stuff, trying to figure things out. I was meeting with Chris at the time. He always wanted to come in and kind of debrief, help give me some guidance and stuff to figure out how to be a youth pastor, really. Yeah. And, and I went to go have lunch with Pate. We got lunch, and after lunch, she had to go to work. So she came up to Moberly for work. And I was like, I'll come see you at work. I had to pick some stuff up from my office at the church. And as I was driving up back to Central, because the week was starting and I was done with the part-time thing. As the week was starting and I'm coming back to Central, I was driving up 63, and I see emergency lights. So as I'm driving, I see emergency lights. So I start to move over, try to make way, and I'm seeing how many emergency lights I'm seeing. And I was like, man, this is not good. This is, whatever this is a bad accident, And so as I get closer and closer, I start rubbernecking the way that everybody does, when you see that something's happened. I start looking, and I was like, that kind of looks like Pate's car. It was flipped upside down, the car was, and I was like, that kind of looks like her car. And you start thinking, you start processing, and you start trying to rationalize, and you're like, no, like that part of the bumper doesn't look the way that her bumper did, and that kind of stuff, trying to figure out why it wasn't her. And the more I drove past, and the car had flipped over in the median, and outside, pulled out of the back window, was her bag. So the EMS had tried to move things and get things pulled out, and her bag was there. They had pulled her bag out of the car. And I knew what happened. I knew it was her. I knew she had flipped over. Thankfully, she had already been loaded into the ambulance by the time that I got there. And I screamed. When I saw the bag and I knew what had happened.
Can't imagine.
It was a very chilling scream that, I'll be honest, to this day kind of still haunts me. I can remember what it sounded like. And I pulled off to the side, pulled off to the shoulder, ran across the highway, 70 mile an hour, speed limit highway. I ran across. Luckily most people are kind of slowing down, and there's an accident, and I ran across, and it was a rough sight. And there was an officer there, and he was like, who's this kid running across the highway? And I was like, this is my fiance's car. And they were like, calm down, okay. They were like, she's in good hands. They've got her in the ambulance. Like, she's heading down to the hospital, talk to me. I helped identify her, told her what her name was, told her where she was from, and they were like, she's going to this hospital. Don't speed. Take your time. They're not going to let you in right away. This is where she's going to be. So I got back to Central. My roommate at the time was Jake Striefler. And I was like, hey man, I need you to take me to the hospital. I was like, Pate's been in a really bad accident. And we had gotten there. I hadn't been there probably 30 minutes or so. And they pulled me into a side room. There was a box of tissues in the room, and I knew the inevitable news that was coming. The doctor came in with the chaplain of the hospital, and they broke the news to me that she had died. And
so in 2 months,
yes,
you lost your dad,
mm-hmm.
helped or grieved with your family during that time, and then you lose Pate.
Yeah. So it was less than 90 days. It hadn't even been 3 months.
Yeah.
Her and I were supposed to be married in May. This happened January of 2019 that her accident happened. We were supposed to be married in May of 2019.
Yeah.
And I just went really numb. Didn't take any more time. I took 1 week off of work from the youth ministry. I continued my semester at Central, and I really just kind of went through the motions, and kind of went on cruise control. I continued to do the youth ministry
It's way
thing.
It's way too much to process.
Yeah, and I continued to do the youth ministry thing. I made it to March, and I had to sit down with the pastor, with Chris. We were just talking, and I felt very ineffective at the youth ministry, which I was. I mean, with everything that I had gone through, I was very emotionally numb. I wasn't very present. I was going through the motions, trying to just make it, kicking my feet as hard as I could to keep my head above water. And I talked to him, and I was like, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be a youth pastor anymore. I felt like I didn't connect with students. I felt like I was being more geared towards preaching and being a pastor. And, I was just processing everything. And it was hard, and we got to talking, and he was like, if you step away, nobody's going to blame you. If you step down from this youth ministry, everybody will understand.
Sure.
And he was like, I think you really need to figure out what you want to do. And I had no idea. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had now lost not just my dad, so I lost part of my past. I lost my future. I thought I was going to be a youth pastor, and I stepped down. I'm no longer there. I lost my fiance, so like the entire forward vision that I had for myself was gone.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what I wanted to do. That summer, I went home to Texas, and I was with my family that summer. And I got involved with a ministry down there. There's a local Christian.
So did you finish school at that point?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
I finished out my semester. I passed.
Yeah.
And that's what matters. But I passed that semester, and I went home, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I got involved with a ministry there, and the guy who led the ministry, he's a local Houston Christian rapper. His name's Trey 9, and I had heard him on the radio when I was down in Texas at one point. I followed him on Instagram, and I just shot him a message on Instagram, and I was like, hey, in my head, this was a long shot. I was like, hey, I know that you're doing ministry and you're doing discipleship. I was like, I'm going to be home from Bible college for a summer. Would you mind if could we meet up and talk, and you disciple me and teach me how to disciple people? And so I did. And so I went home and I got involved with that ministry, and I ended up going into a prison with him, which was a really wild time, because what I didn't realize was that him and another guy that was a part of the ministry as well, they were both Christian rappers, so they both, do the hip hop and all of that stuff. What I didn't realize when I went with them to this prison was that they were putting on a rap concert, a Christian rap concert, in this prison. And I am not a rapper. Like, I don't know if people, people probably don't know that about me. You probably can't tell from looking at me, dressed in my polo and my navy blue shorts. I am not much of a Christian hip hop artist. But I went in and he was like, look, man, he was like, you don't have to rap. He was like, pray. He was like, when we go into this prison, he was like, just pray for these prisoners. Pray that, the lyrics to these songs about God's grace and about who God is and what God wants for them is going to sit with them and call them to respond. And I was like, that I can do.
You can do that.
Like spit some lyrics on a track. No, that's not me. Pray for people. I can do that. But while I was there, the prison chaplain came in. She was a part of this. And so, I got to talking to her about what prison chaplaincy looks like. And so again, these puzzle pieces that fall into place that you don't see as they fall. After Pate died, the first person to minister to me was the hospital chaplain. That summer, I go into this prison, and the person who's talking to me about ministry, for the most part, Trey 9, as far as I remember, he is actually, he used to be a prison chaplain. And so some of his discipleship stuff, he learned from doing that, if I remember correctly. And then the prison chaplain of the prison that I'm in was talking to me about what she does, about how she's a chaplain.
Okay.
The summer ends. I come back for my last semester. I was a super senior. Whoop, whoop. 4.5 years of training. And I came back from my last semester, and Central, you have chapel services. And one of the chapel services that they decided to do was sort of about ministry that's not your conventional ministries. It's not youth pastor. It's not being a children's pastor. It's not being a preaching pastor. It's none of those things. It's not involved in church.
Yeah.
They brought in chaplains, and they had a corporate chaplain. She worked for Tyson Foods, if I remember correctly, as a chaplain. And so she talked about her ministry and what that looks like to work in a corporation doing ministry.
Yeah, I have a friend who's done that.
Right. And so, these were avenues that I hadn't really considered while I was in school. And then Cal McAlexander came in. There was also a prison chaplain who came in, but Cal McAlexander was a retired Navy chaplain, and he was a chaplain endorser. And so what endorsers do is basically they vouch for you as a chaplain. And so they set up doctrinal beliefs, and then they endorse you and they say, yes, we support this person in their ministry. And so they kind of also help to protect you from doing things that go contrary to whatever their doctrinal view is.
Yeah. So one of our master's program graduates just got endorsed yesterday. So she's really excited. Yeah,
and so it's an awesome ministry opportunity. And he talked about being in the Navy, and I'll never forget. He put up a picture during his sermon of like one of those construction buckets, like the whatever goes on like the big fancy, like Caterpillar things. Yeah. Construction equipment, one of those buckets that digs up dirt and stuff. Sure. And he had a picture of that out in the desert, and he was doing baptisms in it. And I saw that picture, and I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, military chaplaincy is what I want to do. My dad had served in the Navy, and I had a long history of military service in my family. My grandfather on my dad's side on my mom's side of the family was in the Air Force. I had a couple of uncles on her side of the family that were in the Navy and the Air Force. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I'm gonna follow. I'm gonna do this military thing. And so I got in contact with Cal and was talking to him about what all of that looks like. He talked to me about the chaplain candidate program, which is what I'm in now. So that's what I do now. But before I got to that point, I still had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew that I didn't really want to get back into full-time ministry yet. I wasn't quite ready for it. Mm-hmm. I became an admissions counselor here.
Right.
I worked in admissions here at Central, and I started in January of 2020, and I was super excited. I had done admissions work as a student when I was here at Central. I went to all of the different, admissions trips, camp teams. Yeah. I loved it. I love traveling is really what it is. And so I was like, the school's going to pay for my traveling, pay me to travel, and I get to talk to and meet new people that I've not met and try to recruit them to do ministry, which is something that I'm also deeply passionate about.
Yeah.
I was very much so excited for that. And that was in January of 2020. So by March of 2020, my job description started looking very different because the world shut down.
Oh my.
And so, that's what I was facing.
Right.
The world shut down. COVID happened. All of the traveling that I was really looking forward to, all of the meeting new people that I was really looking forward to, that stopped. And my boss at the time, Brent Crosswhite, he was a retired Army chaplain.
Right.
And he got to talking to me about the Army, and he was like, man, when you are in Army chaplaincy, he was like, I went airborne. He was like, I jumped out of airplanes. He was like, that's a fun time. He was like, I jumped out of an airplane. He was like, I would be the first one to go. I would jump out first, land first, and have a grill set up ready to make like hot dogs and stuff for everybody who's landing after me. And he was like, the ministry of an Army chaplain is to go and reach people who otherwise likely won't step into a church.
Yeah.
A lot of these people who are soldiers, they're not involved in churches. And chaplains are tasked with ministering to those people and doing counseling for them, setting up programs for them, helping them with finances, helping them with mental health, helping them with all of these things. But then also there is the preaching side of things where you get to preach sermons and you get to do the baptisms that I saw Cal doing. And he was like, Brent was telling me, he was like, I was tasked at a basic training unit. So a TRADOC unit is what they call it. Where it's a base, sort of like Fort Leonard Wood, where there's a lot of people coming in for basic training. Mm-hmm. And he was like, they're not allowed to have things. The only thing they were allowed to have when they came in was one religious text. And he was like, so as the chaplain, who is a Christian chaplain, I'm sitting there and I'm handing out Bibles to people where that's the only thing they can do for fun, for free time. And he was like, I was baptizing people all the time from that. Because these people, they're reading the Bible through and through because that's all they can do when they're not actually training. And so he was like, people were coming to faith, all the time, and I played a role in that. And I was like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I want to do that. And so that's where I'm at now.
Yeah. So I'm listening to your story and thinking back over mine. I grew up in a military family and traveled. I was born in Germany mm-hmm. and lived in 10 different places.
Right.
While my dad was in the military, and we had a heritage of that. And my brother ended up going military. So I'm real familiar with that. I didn't go to church outside of an Army chapel till I was 6. Till my dad retired and we moved off of a base to a mm-hmm. civilian place. It was the first time I'd ever gone to church that wasn't a chapel.
Right.
And it was a dramatic change. It was Rolla, Missouri.
There you go.
That was my dad ended up being professor there, and he was the head of the ROTC program.
There you go.
At University of Missouri-Rolla.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went, and I went from a pipe organ, kind of thing, in a place where everybody walks in and they're absolutely quiet, to a church that was just full of joy and, like Southern gospel music was what was going on. And it was, for me, it was like, I was like going to Disneyland or something. Mm-hmm. I just absolutely loved it. And it really shaped me. But around that time, I'd stopped being the dean. I became the dean here at Central during a time of kind of crisis. We had a change in presidency, had some financial issues, and we worked through that. And my dream job when I came to Central, my middle son, we were talking to the family about making a change from being a preacher to being a professor. And my middle son asked me, "Is this your dream job?" And I said, "Yeah, this is my dream job." And he said, "Okay, I'll go." So that was what got him over the hump, of he had just graduated from high school, and so I came to Central, became the dean in that time of crisis, and then right about the time you graduated, I stepped out. I ended my time being the dean. So I got to go back to the classroom, and a friend of mine that was working here, we'd both been in ministry and leadership ministry, preaching ministry and leading. And so we put together our own ministry to help churches that were struggling with their minister,
right,
or having problems with their minister. We call it Ministry Transition Solutions. So what do you do? How do you find a new minister? And one of the big things we discovered, because in our office, Brandon had interacted with lots of churches who were looking for ministers,
right?
And we began to discover there was patterns. There was reasons ministers left churches,
right?
And a lot of times it didn't have anything to do with the minister. It had something to do with the leadership and what was going on in the church, that the minister just said, "There's got to be something better than this."
Right.
And so we created this ministry and began doing interim ministries. And so we got involved at the church you're at now, at the First Christian Church in Bell. Mm-hmm. And probably spent a year there. But we created a program which it had 2 tracks. It had a leadership track, which had part A and part B, introduction to leadership, and then, going deep in leadership. But it also had a spiritual formation part.
Right.
And so I did the leadership part. Brandon did the spiritual formation part. And that church went through the entire program and, set up pulpit committee and stuff. So they went through the entire program really before we started looking for a minister. So in that time period that you're talking about, where you can't travel at all, can't go anywhere, that's right where we're taking off.
Yes.
With that ministry. Okay, so pick up there.
Okay.
You're the admissions counselor, and
yes,
you can't travel, and
right. And so that's the thing, is I'm stuck. I shouldn't say stuck at Central. I was physically stuck, and I love to travel. And so the thing that I loved about my job was being able to travel and go and see new people. And the thing that I hate the most is just like the day-to-day grind of like sending emails and phone calls. Like that's not really my speed.
Yeah.
And that became the only thing I was doing. And so I'm still learning from Brent, still looking into chaplaincy, and he's pushing me in the direction of going into the candidate program and doing these things and talking to me about what is required to be a chaplain. And he's like, you have to have 2 years minimum of full-time ministry experience to be a chaplain if you want to be active duty. And I was like, okay, but I'm still here. And I enjoyed my time here, but it really started to kind of come to its end as the world is just kind of in limbo. And right around June, actually right around this time, Brandon stepped into my office, and I feel bad for what I'm about to say, because it just makes me feel bad that I appeared this way. But he basically sat in a chair across from me, and he was like, "I know that you don't like being here." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know it was so obvious." And it wasn't that I didn't like being here; it's that I felt cooped up and caged. But that's the way everybody felt during COVID, you know? And he was like, "I know that you don't like being here." He said, "There's a church that Eric and I have been working with, and they're looking to hire a new minister, and I think you could be a good fit." And I was like, oh, you know, like full-time ministry again, you know, like I knew I needed it, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to step into it. And I'm actually coming up on the 5-year anniversary.
That is amazing.
This upcoming Sunday, Father's Day, was the very first sermon that I ever preached at that church.
Wow. Man,
and so
time flies.
Yeah, and so he called me and he was like, "Hey, you know, I've been preaching and filling in. I can't do it this upcoming this Sunday because it's Father's Day. You know, I'm not going to be available to do it. Would you be interested in filling in?" And so I did. And I got there, and I loved the people of the church. They were incredibly friendly, incredibly welcoming. And I was like, man, if there was ever a church for me to get involved with and start preaching and start learning ministry and start, you know, being a minister to people, it's got to be here. And Brandon pushed me to continue to apply. So I did. Yeah. I ended up applying. He told me, he was like, you know, there's some other people that they're looking at. He was like, "I'll be honest, but can't hurt to throw your hat in the ring." And I said, okay. I got hired.
Sweet.
I got hired there and started working there full time in September of 2020. And so that began the transition from Central into preaching ministry. And since I've been there, I started working in the chaplain candidate program. Since I started preaching there, I've been working on building all of that experience at the church. And I was honest with them. You know, when I stepped in, I was like, you know, I just want you to know my goal, my lifelong goal is to be an Army chaplain. Mm-hmm. You know, if that prevents you from hiring me, you know, I understand if you're looking for somebody who's going to be more long-term. But I told him, I was like, I need experience in order to be a chaplain for the Army. And that's what I want to do. Yeah.
My very first ministry followed a guy. So a little bitty church in South Missouri, little bitty church where the guy came there for 2 years. And I think he already had his master's degree, mm-hmm. but he had to have those 2 years of experience. And so he spent those 2 years and then he left, and that gave the opening for me to start preaching there. That was my first paid ministry that I ever had.
Right. But I'm very deeply passionate about chaplaincy. I love it. You know, there's something about being a soldier and being a minister at the same time that I just it's.
So have you done something like, have you joined the National Guard?
I'm currently working with the Army Reserves right now.
Army Reserves, okay.
So the chaplain candidate program, the way that it works is as you are working on your Master of Divinity, because that's one of the things that is required to be a chaplain, you have to have an MDiv or the equivalency.
Right.
And so that's what I'm working on right now. I'll hopefully be finishing that up. And by hopefully, I'll be finishing it up next year. So next May is when I'll be graduating and getting my MDiv. And while you're in the program for the MDiv, you can enter into the chaplain candidate program, which is what I'm in now.
All right.
And so what that is it's basically an extended internship. Mm-hmm. And so they attach you to most frequently a battalion, which is sort of it's sort of like the base level echelon of military service. You do have companies and things like that, but a battalion kind of oversees them. And so you get attached to a battalion chaplain who oversees several different companies, and you learn what it looks like. You shadow them and you learn how to be a chaplain. You learn what it looks like to minister to soldiers.
So how long have you been doing that?
I've been doing that for a couple of years now.
Okay.
It will be 2 years in September that I've been doing that.
And that's been affirming to you?
Yes, very much so. I love putting on the uniform. The days where I wake up and I put on the uniform, and even the days that are early, for the most part, they have me at Fort Leonard Wood now. Now I work with the brigade, which was another God thing of, God sending me the right chaplain at the right time when I was looking to transition. And so now I'm getting different kinds of experience as a chaplain from him. But I wake up at 4:30 in the morning on my Saturdays and Sundays. The days of the weekend where everybody wants to sleep in, I'm up at 4:30 when I go to be with the Army, and I love it. I love waking up. I love putting on the uniform. I love heading down there. I love working with the soldiers. I love learning about being in the Army. I love the mistakes I make. So recently, this past weekend, I had a promotion ceremony. So after 18 months of being in the service, if you've done your stuff as a chaplain candidate, you move from a second lieutenant to a first lieutenant. And so I did that. Wow. I don't have prior service. And
so did you go through like basic training?
No, not yet. Not yet.
Okay,
so as a chaplain, you do go through a version of it.
Yeah.
You go through a program, what they call CHBOLC. So it's CHBOLC, which is a basic officer course for chaplains. Yeah. And so you learn how to be in the military, and you learn how to do all of that kind of stuff. And it's a good time. So, I haven't done that yet. And so for the most part, I'm still learning how to be in the military, which is, it's a really weird time, where you don't really know what's going on and you're trying to figure everything out. And, for my promotion ceremony, they had me do like an about face, and I did it wrong. And it was, and it's one of those things that it's comical because, unfortunately, not a whole lot of people expect a whole lot from chaplains because they know that you're minister stuff. Yeah. You're not this like elite soldier for the most part. And so, for the most part, you get a little cushion sometimes. But I had like 4 people pull me aside afterward, and they were like, "Hey, you did it wrong." They're like, "You should probably work on it."
It's the little things.
It is. It is. And I was like, man, I was terrified because I was like, I'm going to mess something up. And now that I'm at the thing is that now that I'm at a brigade, I have a lot of people who are soldiers and have been soldiers for a long time, who tend to be more towards, a lot of them are almost more towards the end of their career. Okay. And so I have a lot of like long-term career soldiers who just watched me butcher the easiest thing to do.
When you're working, at the lower level and you're working with the companies, does that feel a little bit like youth ministry? Because those you're looking at 18, 19-year-old.
Yes, sometimes
for the most part.
And that's the beautiful thing about chaplaincy that I love is when I came to Central, as you said earlier, I'm a curious person. When I came to Central, I really wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do for ministry, and I found different aspects of ministry that I really loved, that really appealed to me. And chaplaincy was a nice way to wrap that all in a bow. And so it was like, you have people who are going to be college age, people who are fresh out of high school, and they jump straight into the military. It's the first thing they do when they get out. Yeah. You have some who are still actually in high school that the military is the next stage, and so they're looking at recruiting and going through it at the age of like 17. Their junior or early senior year, looking into going into the military, and so you have that. You also work with families. So that's a large part of chaplaincy is working with the families to help build the family unit and help help keep soldiers and their families stable and healthy. So you do a lot of marital counseling and premarital counseling and that kind of stuff to help them have a solid foundation. You do things to help build the morale of the soldiers. And so you're ministering to everybody from very young, because the families of these soldiers, they have kids. And so you minister to them. So you have children's ministry. You work with their teenagers. So you have, youth ministry. And then you have like college age ministry, because you have some who are fresh out of high school and into college. And then all the way up to some of the career-long military people who, they're soldiers that are pushing 60 and they're looking forward to being done, even into the people who are retired. People who are retired from the military are still allowed access to military bases, and you'd be surprised at how many still come to chapel services and stuff at the military base that they settled down close to. And so to an extent, you even get into the older generations of people that you're ministering to.
So I think we just got a hint. We're supposed to wrap this up.
Yeah.
So let's go back to your analogy of the puzzle.
Okay.
When I think about myself, I'm thinking seriously. Retirement's coming up quick.
Yeah.
If your 5 years has gone by really quick, in your ministry in Bell, my retirement's coming up.
Right.
Coming up pretty quick. So a lot of the puzzle has been put together.
Right.
And so, for me, I've gone through a shift actually the last couple of years.
Okay.
In my teaching, because I've moved more into the ministry side, which sounds kind of weird,
right?
Because I've been mostly a New Testament professor,
right?
I've been a Bible professor, and I teach Greek, as well. So I've had that role, but I had 20 years of full-time ministry before I became a professor, and almost the whole time I've been a professor, I've had a ministry. I'm preaching regularly at a local church.
Right.
But my terminal degree, my DMin is in preaching, and so with some transitions that have happened here the last couple of years, I've been pushed into teaching the preaching class, and so it started off like, okay, here I need you to teach the second level preaching class. Okay, I'll do that. But then things really speeded up to where like I'm teaching like all the preaching classes at the undergraduate level, and so now I've moved into a position where I am the program director for ministry studies.
There you go.
And so that means all of ministry studies here at Central, I'm the program director for the undergraduate side of that. And preaching dominates my teaching schedule now. So that's kind of an interesting twist that I really didn't expect. And so one of the things I'm doing now, I've never really saw myself as a preaching professor. But now I have to think.
Now you are
that way. So like I'm teaching a class coming up this semester on the history of preaching.
Oh wow!
And I'm discovering that usually is not done at the undergraduate level.
Right.
And so I'm digging into that, and that's pretty interesting. And I'm going to learn a ton of stuff about the history of preaching because I've got to teach a class on it. So this year will be, that'll be a learning experience. And so as I think of, how my puzzle is being finished out, this is a section that 2 years ago I wouldn't have thought of. Oh, I have this blank section in my puzzle that has nothing in it. Mm-hmm. But now that's being filled in. And, you start thinking at this point about, what kind of legacy are you going to leave?
Right.
And so, hopefully I'll have the opportunity, as time goes by, I'll take the opportunity to put some of the stuff that I've been doing for years and years and years into writing. And the things I'm most passionate about and the things I love the most, I'll put those into writing. That's what my near future looks like, the next 5 to 7 years. Is going to be focusing on those areas. So why don't you wrap us up with a little bit of how do you see your puzzle at the current time?
Ideally, I see my puzzle not quite halfway complete. I see the beginning of the grand picture.
Yeah, you're just right there at the stepping off.
Right. And so, I see myself sort of, now the picture is starting to come together. I don't know what the rest of the picture looks like. I see myself becoming hopefully an active duty chaplain next June. I'll go before a selection board and hopefully be accepted full time. If not, that's okay. Throughout my lifetime, I've learned that God's ways are higher than my ways.
Yeah.
Which, the Bible says, but when you're actually going through it and you're actually dealing with it, that's a much harder pill to swallow sometimes. Yeah. But it's true. His ways are higher and better and more complete than my ways are. And I have been learning to trust him in that, and I am hoping to continue to trust him in that. Yeah. And that even if I'm not accepted, active duty next year, I still believe that this is what God wants for me. And so it's less, I'm willing to try again and to, apply again. Yeah. I'm willing to do the reserves and do part-time for a time if that's what it takes. I love soldiers. I love being a soldier. I have a passion for soldiers. And I love being the light in a lot of their lives. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. It's all about being a light, being a hope, and showing that there is a brighter light and a brighter hope that they can ultimately find through Christ. And so that's kind of what I envision and what I want to do.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time and getting to review, some of the stuff from the last 10 years. Some of it was really hard. Some of it was a big smile.
Yeah.
But I appreciate how I hear you tell your story. It reminds me of my story, where we have this heart to serve God, and we put the rest of it into His hands.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's the best thing you can do is let God take over.
I agree. All right.